George. Moving on to item number 8. Review disposal capacity alternatives. Dennis St. Peter's here from CES.
I've got a handout. This agenda item was added late in the process, so since the agenda was finalized, Greg and I and George and Andy Hamilton worked on summarizing. There are extra copies there. May not be enough for everybody. So this is in support of our public benefit determination that's been filed with the Department of Environmental Protection. There's been questions from the department, questions from the public, comments from the public. There's been letters back from the MRC to the department and the public record that reflect answers to their questions related to capacity. And what the thought was here was just succinctly summarize the lengthy record that's being created. It gets complicated, but this is meant to just simplify it, boil it down to what's available for capacity and what's not. So again, this is all related to the integrated solid waste management facility that's proposed for 2018. The first category of disposal facilities are waste energy facilities. One in Auburn, Eco Maine in Portland, the MRC facility in Biddeford, which is closed, and the PERC facility, which you're very familiar with. And essentially the Auburn and Portland facilities are at capacity, transportation distances, and the infrastructure disruption are some of the major reasons why that's not good capacity for the MRC. The items under PERC, which you're all more familiar with tonight, but the contract expires in 2018. MRC has preferred extending the contract in partnership with PERC, but the intensive negotiations proved not feasible thus far for cost and scale reasons. And then there's a group of state-owned landfills. Carpenter Ridge, which there's a footnote number 1 in this summary that refers back to the state. In short, it's called the state plan, but it's a plan the state DEP puts together to summarize capacity. So a lot of the capacity discussion is referring back to the state plan. So Carpenter Ridge, which is right next to Lincoln, T2R8, it's not developed. There is a permitted capacity there, but it's very limited and it's special waste only. The state plan listed as NA as far as capacity. The Dobie landfill, which the MRC did take a look at when they did release an RFP, we hired our company to help take a look at that, and there was several significant reasons why this wasn't deemed to be a feasible landfill opportunity for MRC. The landfill is very large so far and it's non-secure. There are environmental impacts and probably more significant environmental impacts if we were to use what's referred to as a valley fill. It would be placing waste over old waste and more or less squeezing that waste. And there's no liner underneath it. There's already significant leachate quantities that are being dealt with in the 90 million gallon range. There's existing closure costs that haven't been determined for tens of acres. And their license is very limited to the types of waste and capacity. You have to have an expansion, you have to get an amendment to accept the waste that the MRC is generating. Transportation distance, and then the infrastructure disruption and changes. When I refer to the infrastructure changes and disruption, that's all the transfer stations, storage sites, trucking methods that all of the MRC communities are using. That because this is far enough away, it would disrupt that type of infrastructure. And then Juniper Ridge is listed in the state plan as running out of capacity in 2021. You'll hear a lot of the state statute on public benefit defines capacity as either immediate, short-term, and long-term. Immediate is 3 years from the date your public benefit application went in. So in our application, we had said that there isn't an immediate need because per contract is available to you until 2018. But both short-term, which is 5 years, and long-term, which is 10, according to the statute. Of course, you want to plan for more than 10 years, but that's what the statute. So when we say long-term, it relates to public benefits for 10 years. So Juniper Ridge at this point does not offer or satisfy your short-term or long-term capacity needs. It's also mentioned that the ownership and control would be something that would have to be overcome. And then there's a group of municipally owned solid waste, Augusta, Bath, Brunswick, Presque Isle, and Tri-Community Landfill. Essentially all that capacity is dedicated to the existing users. Transportation varies, but in general it would have a significant cost and additional environmental impact from that truck traffic. And then there would be significant repackaging of waste to have it transfer that far away. And then the only commercial landfill left in the state, Waste Management Crossroads. There's a limited license capacity there. This is 2027. And then the transportation distance would have to be overcome, infrastructure disruptions, and then the ownership and control have to be addressed as well. So that's trying to boil it down to be as succinct as you can with the existing capacity.
This is good. This is really good. Thank you. Not necessarily all the information, but having it on one sheet.
Any questions? Thank you, Dennis. Okay, item number 9, administrative report. Great.
Thank you, Chip. First, new charters, long-standing, and the board item. Not classified, but the MRC says the board policy has added communities through the years. So that remains a standing item. But we haven't had any new charters sign up for a while. I would look at the new charters sign up in the past quarter. Trends in MSW deliveries, that's a memo in the packet. We detail fluctuations in waste deliveries by member compared to prior quarter and then the same quarter in the prior year. And it's just one of the items that we keep tabs on in case there are unusual fluctuations that come to light. We might be in a position to talk to member communities about those fluctuations and support their efforts with regard to the kind of stuff with the current contracts and so forth. I will say that the one that caught my eye in particular this quarter with the Ripley and solid waste and the Guilford, that percentage difference is the same because that group of communities uses the same transfer facility. But they did see a sharp drop. second quarter compared to prior year. But really, what caught my eye on this one was, it was also below, the quantities were below what they delivered in the first quarter of this year, which is very unusual given the quarter-to-quarter seasonality cycle. So on that one, I got a call in the tramp. King, who runs the facility right there at Big Bay. So I just checked with him and see if there's anything we can do to support the needs out there. And that really was the single change that caught my eye, and following up on questions related to some of the items. If no, I'll move on. The next item I have is our pending application for termination of public benefit. And Dennis has provided a pretty thorough report on capacity alternatives and other facilities, so that's probably I did want to mention we learned that the Orono period closes September 2nd. And so our hope is shortly after that date that we will receive a favorable determination from the department on our pending application. So that's it with respect to that item. I did have one additional item. I sent an informational piece a month or so ago on policy and environment in relation to waste and energy in the state of Connecticut. I circulated a news report titled "The State Legislature is Running the Death Knell for Trash and Energy in Connecticut." So they're undergoing a lot of changes down there from policy standpoint. The Connecticut Resource Recovery Authority has actually been renamed to better reflect the direction that state is headed. And they're moving more toward a materials management approach, looking at forms of waste conversion that will derive more energy value from MSW, and also look to new frontiers for gains in recycling. And I've circulated that report a while back because it felt eerily similar to what we're experiencing here in Maine. I think we're a fair amount further along than the state of Connecticut is. But I raised this because I was contacted by Mr. Peter Egan. He's the Director of Operations and Environmental Affairs of the former Connecticut Resource Recovery Authority. And they have a high interest in striking dialogue with us here in Maine, given that we're somewhat ahead of the curve in relation to their planning process, as there's a movement away from RDF waste and energy and into a new generation of waste conversion technologies that we believe will serve the needs of our region well moving forward. So we'll do what we can to share information with those in Connecticut as they wrestle with the same issues that we're looking to solve here. That concludes my administrative report. After answer the question.
Questions, Greg?
I did have one item, speaking of problem solving and planning, and it's well known that my long-standing relationship with Burke is changing, and there's a high interest here just recently in member communities. Have a high interest in learning more about what the waste conversion technologies that we're looking at entail, and I think our position will get a little further into that later today. But there's also a high interest in gaining understanding where the relationship with the current partnership has been so smooth, so constant, so long. The member communities have an interest in understanding is what has worked so well all these years now has a high risk of not working for us after 2018 well at all. And I did have a question. The negotiation occurred, I mean, that's all the way back to 2010 into 2011. We met this a while. In early 2010, Perks Partners asked us to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which provided some level of restriction on details associated with that negotiation. We have a high interest in telling as much as we can, and I got to turn to Dan McKay, our legal advisor on that, and we're looking for a bit of guidance on what extent we can tell the entire story without putting the organization at risk and the communities at risk. And so with that.
Well, in general terms, the confidentiality agreement is obviously designed to foster an environment in which there can be free exchange of information in the context of negotiations. It did recognize the quasi-public nature of this body and it contained language permitting the MRC to keep its membership generally apprised of the status of the negotiations. But it does protect from public disclosure, obviously confidential information that might be shared by partners within the context of those negotiations, and the specific terms, whatever proposals or counter-proposals may be made. But in terms of the general status of the negotiations, as I said, there was a proviso in the agreement to permit the MRC to share that, recognizing that it has an obligation as a public entity.
Questions of the board? Sophie?
So, to delve into the difference between general and specific.
Anything that I think, let's start with what's clearly on one side of the line, what's clearly on the other side of the line. Any confidential business information that might have been provided within the context of those negotiations.
So there's modeling software that we paid to have, that we shared the cost with the PERC expense. That modeling software where we put inputs in, the general input out, is that?
Well, I'm not sure that, in my view, would be, I'm not sure that falls within the context of the negotiations. That would be joint effort.
Well, I mean, it was a tool used.
It was
one significant it's a central part.
So I would say that certainly any confidential information that was an input.
I don't remember the specifics of the input, so we'd be all set there.
And I would say that a general statement as to the output, such as what it means for the overall context of the negotiations, in my judgment, would be within the ambit of general information as to the status of negotiations. Provide specifics, specific numbers would be probably on at least arguably on the other side.
Yeah, if I may, I think just looking at the agreement, and the definition of confidential information is clause that excludes, confidential information shall not include any information that the holder customarily provides to the party or to others without restriction on disclosure. So anything that, for example, that is actual cost or revenue information is provided in the ordinary differently with that. So there's a difference between prospective information and actual information with sense.
Discussions about scalability of the plant?
I think discussions about scalability of the plant would probably fall within the scope of discussions that have occurred publicly in these meetings, would be within the exception of George. I should have prefaced this whole thing the other party would regard as proprietary and would take steps to protect its proprietary. So this type of information that is publicly disclosed by PERC, the numbers Peter reviews in the report, other numbers that over the years have been publicly disclosed by PERC, are not protected as proprietary, they're not
information from this model that's received in the future be covered under the non-disclosure agreement?
Well, if it's in the context of the negotiations.
No, it's just shared individually with the board member.
If it's shared individually with the board member outside the context of the negotiations without any other contractual restriction, I think that's
I raised this, but First General Partner sponsored a community meeting in Brewer, and a representative of General Partner made a statement with the questions, what happened with negotiations. And the General Partner rep said, well, the MRC walked away from the table.
Well, let me address that one.
And I'd like to as well.
Let me address that specifically, and then you can. When that statement was made in public, then they're not regarding that as proprietary anymore. They did a public disclosure, so I think that's no longer proprietary. And then certainly can respond to that in a public forum.
Can I do that now?
Greg had the floor for a minute and go something.
And I'm done, but that one was trouble. Okay. We received a formal letter in late 2011 from each of PERC's private partners that cut off the negotiation, based upon the conclusion that it was not feasible to operate the PERC facility up to 2018. What do you say?
I think that's been kind of tough. And it's one of those places where for so many years, the MRC board just kind of managed the contracts, managed the relationship. We got the partners that finally came to the table and wanted to make it all work. And it was great when everybody's needs were aligned for the same outcome. And it was very easy, I think, to forget that each of those partners had very different needs. It just happened that they aligned for the same outcome. And when we started, I want to say in 2005, we started conversations about what are we going to do in 2018. Even the board back then was very kind of in this mindset of, we're going to keep doing what we're doing because it's working. And then as we got further down, there was a formal vote of the board that we're going to try to extend this current arrangement. And we knew that it might not be quite as financially feasible. You know, it was going to hurt a little bit just because we would have hookup agreement anymore. And it was with that understanding that two board members, I went out with Greg Brown and George and Greg, just the two Gregs, and we spent 3 days in Minnesota trying to come to a general idea of what this arrangement would look like. And at that meeting, it became very clear that private partners are in business to make money, and we are in business to meet our mission, which is around the sustainable, environmentally friendly, blah, blah, blah. It was at that meeting that when we said we simply cannot take a proposal back to membership that requires guaranteed tonnage to PERC. Towns were already struggling to try to meet that gap. The need for the gap wasn't there anymore because the gap was originally created as part of this financing mechanism. It was our skin in the game. And we fought with them for, I don't know, half a day about that, until we finally just said, you don't understand. We're not going back with GAP again. And if we do make some kind of guarantee in there, you gotta understand it's gonna be a whole lot smaller, because we as an organization are going to be pushing recycling. And at that point, everything in the room just changed. And we heard back that your number, not to be specific, is well north of $100 a ton, which our members, we just couldn't see that they could afford that. That it made sense. That we would get enough of a mass of people to stay with this organization to move us forward into the next phase. And then we talked about, are there ways that we could really support the hierarchy with incineration at the top, which then created this huge fight between MRC and our partners around, you're not going to take money away from Maine municipal revenue sharing or other pools of money to subsidize waste energy. That's just not going to make sense, which has gotten us into the predicament with our litigation against the partners. So there's a whole bunch happening here, and I think that our partners have really been able to play off the fact that we don't want to violate this non-disclosure agreement, but there's half of the story being told, and I think we need to get a little bit better at telling the other half. Because at this point, I cannot believe that while I sit on the board, I could support moving forward with any kind of relationship with our current partners. That's how that is. And I never thought we would do that.
I agree with you.
I guess I'd like to add a comment at this point. Sophie touched on it. You know, when you're looking at a tip fee that's on the upper side of $100, and sitting at a public hearing in the DEP on July 2nd, and hearing that it was only an $8 a ton difference. Obviously, that's misinformation. How that ever got out there, it doesn't matter to me, but I gotta believe that, well, I know that this board wouldn't be doing the things and taking the actions that this board has done and continues to be dedicated to do if it was only an $8 a ton differential. It's significant, it's millions of dollars, and our goal and our dedication to this process is looking out for the members of this organization. And I think that I can speak for the board that obviously with the actions we've taken, this is the best direction that we see fit to move forward.
Not only that, but hearing from our members and the public that there is more desire to move a little bit higher up the hierarchy, looking out into the future.
Anyone else from board members or the audience? Any questions from the audience? Come on, there isn't many of us here.
I have a whole list of questions, but Perk isn't here to this department, so.
There are questions for Perk?
Yes. Pages. That I'd like answers to.
What would be the best avenue to get those questions to a partner? Are they operational questions or?
It's everything. Financial, everything is included on it.
I don't know why we couldn't take the questions Mr. Video has to ask and then find a way, to forward those to Berk's private partners and see if we can get an answer.
Some of those we may have answers to just because of the information that we get from the partners. And if they're operational, and not to put Peter on the spot, but everyone knows his operation.
Exactly.
Operation, yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it would be fair.
It's
It's ownership type. I don't think some of that stuff would be really fair to have Peter try to answer.
No, just operation.
There.
Anything operationally?
Peter does a great job.
We agree.
Yes, we absolutely agree. I mean, the operations at that facility have been set.
I have great relations with the staff, and I'm fine with that. It's the partners. But
Operations crew is the #1 asset.
Sir?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for asking for public response. My name is Paul Schroeder. I live here in Orono. I've been following waste policy, for years related to Juniper Ridge imposition on our communities. And, I'm really shocked, and it takes my breath away to hear the situation that you're in and that we're in. And yeah, as a member of the public, we deserve some explanations. A lot of our fellow residents and citizens, from all kinds of communities that are part of MRC are going back to their select boards and their town councils, and they're finding out in these resolutions that were passed, these councils and select boards really didn't know what they were voting for. They didn't know they were voting for a landfill. They didn't know they were voting for one of their own communities, or maybe not even one of their communities, to take the garbage that everybody else can't deal with and dump it on them in a pristine place. And then we find out that that Juniper Ridge can't, we have no assurances about Juniper Ridge. Well, yeah, we don't have assurances about Juniper Ridge. There are a ton of assumptions about what that was supposed to be for, and it got turned over to the private sector, and the state has been held hostage by this relationship, which honestly, and I'll bring it up again, you folks could have entered into 10 years ago. And now you're running around trying to solve a problem in a way that it hasn't been solved, as you've mentioned. So we have Juniper Ridge, that's not an option. We have PERC, even if it runs at half scale or whatever, tipping fees are too high, that's not an option. Echo Maine, who is collecting customers right in this service area, they're not an option. So we as the public, in my opinion, this is how it feels. We become the victims. We become the victims because you can't sit down and negotiate with your partners, whoever the heck they are. And we become the victims because the state, in misguided policies in the past, has turned their operation over to a private vendor that's not allowing the public in, which is what it was supposed to be for, the public. This is where Maine's trash is supposed to go. There's 20 million cubic yards of unclaimed and unlicensed potential capacity at Juniper Ridge, and do I want to see it filled? No. I'd like to see Juniper Ridge used and managed under state policy the manner that Echo Maine uses theirs, which is zero growth landfill. Now, why can't you people sit down, really, with Casella, with the state, with PERC, with everybody, and get this solved? Because you guys can't do it. We're being dumped on. How about the actual cost of waste? Let's bite the bullet. As far as I know, the people in Portland there have been paying surcharges for years so they could take control of their waste management future. We've been doling out rebates for years so that we could keep prices low. Well, now push comes to shove, as they say. So my comment is, I'm really disappointed, and I'm really shocked, and I'm really heartbroken that we cannot get you, who are all municipal officials, can't sit down and get this solved for everybody. And the way you're going to solve it is through a subterfuge of building a dump, and you don't even call it a dump, you call it an integrated solid waste management facility. But it's a dump. The first thing that has to get licensed is a dump. Did you go to the municipalities and say, we want to license a dump? Did you go out and actually have a public process of finding these properties? Okay, so you're going to dump on somebody, and you're going to have your own little solution, and we're going to have everybody competing with everybody forever, and it's not working. So that's my opinion, and thank you very much for letting me say it. And I do wish someone would rise to the occasion and get this thing solved. Thank you.
Stan?
Mr. Reeves is regulatory counsel for the MRC. May I make a suggestion to the board? You've heard two good opportunities to get questions about the existing system into the public record, which is where I think it belongs, is in the DEP's public record. We need to be open and transparent. If the questions that are posed, I think both Mr. Schroeder and Mr. Pinion have questions. If those could be forwarded to you and those could be deposited into the public record, at such time as they're discussed in a public setting like this and they're placed in the public record, the non-disclosure agreement has no applicability. So it would seem to me that we would want to get those questions, those good policy questions, into the public record and then find a way to address them as best we can in the context of the public proceeding. Because the questions Mr. Schroeder is raising, I suspect the questions Mr. Pinion is raising, do go to this question on the public benefit determination. And to address the comment about the integrated solid waste management facility, I think the disservice that we've all been doing to one another is we've been following a regulatory process that requires that we start with the public benefit determination because that has the longest lead time. But I've heard nothing from the MRC board, from its executive director, from its advisors that suggests that everybody's really happy about trying to site a landfill in Maine as the sum and substance of what the MRC is trying to do. Just the opposite. They're looking at the waste hierarchy and they're trying to come up with new forms of doing exactly what I think Mr. Schroeder and Mr. Pinion would want to see. And I think it would be more balanced as part of this proceeding if the MRC could serve its public role in a very public way and get these questions and responses in the public record. So just a suggestion.
Thank you. Well taken, thank you.
Just a question for Dan. Am I correct that in the contract that was signed between the Park General Partner and Casella that allows towns to, one of the elements of that was to allow towns to backfill for single stream recycling so we didn't get hit with gap penalties for doing it? But my thought, correct me if I'm wrong, is that there was another element in that contract that barred Casella from negotiating with MRC communities for MRC for solid waste disposal post 2018 until a year and some after the closure of the park.
We try to play by the rules.
Huh?
We try to play by the rules.
And just to clarify, I think we said this, so just to clarify, the MRC is not a party to that agreement. That's not an agreement the MRC has. That was an agreement that was entered into separately by the PERC, the other PERC partners, and the seller. So that was not a restriction that the MRC had any participation in the process.
My understanding is not only that we didn't have any participation, but we had zero ability to impact that.
One aspect real quick of that contract, that did enter the public record, the Casella contract, so that is available for this entirety. Well, the pricing got redacted, but anyway, that agreement to this entirety is in the public realm and available for anyone to obtain.
Anyone, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Actually, this was for Dennis CES. On this document, review of disposable capacity, I see a lot of these environmental impacts. One of these environmental impacts, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how would these environmental impacts be different than the watershed impacts to the phenomenon which you're looking at now?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the statute on public benefit talks about the commissioners allowed to factor in transportation distances. And one of the things the department did was ask the MRC to help explain, what are those. So a lot of our response to the DEP comments spells this out. I was trying to boil this down into the most simple terms, right. but the cost, I think, speaks for itself for transportation. So every ton of waste that you're transporting up further away.
I guess the second part of that question would be Lincoln. Is really 22 miles a deal breaker. I find it hard because there's a knock down at the end of the access road, that facility.
Yeah, I don't know what the distance is.
Yeah, because I think it's exactly off the interstate where you're not even getting into Lincoln. Yep. So as far as access, I don't think there's any better access to another facility because there's no businesses and nothing flows. But again, the Penobscot. So if the Penobscot's a deal breaker for that one, I'm wondering about this. And I guess my final one, I'll just leave to my attorney as far as the final question, the round peg in the square hole. As far as the Merck's ability to run and operate a solid waste. So I'll let that play out. That's my main question is how these all got kicked out environmentally, but there's no environmental issues at all when the two sites move forward.
This relates to the statute on public benefit, and the environmental impacts are specifically talking about the transportation. So the environmental impacts associated with extra transportation of waste, emissions, traffic, those types of things.
So the Carpenter Ridge one is basically 22 miles.
Yes.
Mr. Pino.
The current plant already exists, and I was under the impression that MRC was also trying to purchase that facility for our own needs. The one thing that I've always thought since I started this 6 years ago is why can't one bag of trash go onto a conveyor belt, be separated, and everything that's reusable taken out? And why can't PERC, with its investors, see the opportunity here to make a lot of money off the solid waste that can be recycled in that facility, all the way up to organics that comes out of that bag? And the end result is that's what gets processed and burned with the facility. Also for brush that's carried off, that we literally have burn piles in our own solid or MSW facilities. We have brush there that just gets burned and released into the air. It's fuel. It's something worth doing something with other than just putting it on a burn pad at a municipal landfill and burning it. One, it's got to be harming nature because we have scrubbers down at PERC and they use that wood to fire this system up. Why isn't it something that they are looking to adopt 21st century technology into the current location to benefit the MRC communities and everyone else that comes there? That plant is going to be 30 years old. It's outdated, and the use of it, I do not believe that people's electrical bills should be subsidized, have subsidies on there to run that plant. So why aren't they looking towards the future as investors, and why are they clinging to the past?
You've hit on a number of topics, but I think the RFEI is probably the first one that might help explain the process we're going through and in relation to our plan.
Great. Well, I was going to turn to you since the letter was addressed to you. It's a tough one, Matt. We asked that very question on looking to the future, implementation of new technology at the site. In fact, RFEI, the process that we undertook to look at new technologies and so forth, there's a high emphasis on retrofit at the existing site initially. But as the process unfolded, we saw a lack of interest on the part of private partners in evaluating those technologies with us. So we reached a point where I think we that induced us to ask formally, and we received a formal letter that stated, and this is addressed to the board president, by the way, so I'll let him recount all the details in that letter. But now, seriously, the answer was, the way we've always done it's highest and best. We have no interest in change.
But these facilities exist in Europe. They exist here in the United States now. There's only a couple. One just came online, I believe, in Alabama. So the cost of this is well worth it to move forward, to recycle as much as we can and not fill a landfill. But I was under the impression it was 89 to 90% efficiencies in recycling.
I think that there's potential. The world's changing.
And we went to the facility in Alabama and looked at that and visited that. And it was a great trip and we learned a lot. I think that your questions are in line on the process that we continue to go through as far as investigating new technologies. I hope you wait around after lunch and hear fiber rights presentation. That's a technology we went and visited that frankly I'm pretty excited about. There's a number of different things that we looked at.
I mean, just to put some perspective. First of all, I don't know how to answer your question because I've been asking the same question. We started this process because of looking at technologies. In 2007, we had a board, essentially a mini retreat to talk about alternative technologies. It's a significant presentation. We share that with the partners. We've been following them over a 7-year period of time. A lot of things have happened in that time. Two big ones being that a lot of money in information technology, the IT sector in Silicon Valley has suddenly looked at green tech and clean tech, and suddenly there's a lot of money going into waste conversion technology. The second thing that happened, frankly, was stimulus money, the ARRA, when billions of dollars went into environmental technologies, and a lot of that was for programs to support emerging technologies. So things that weren't there in 2007 are emerging and are in consideration today. We spent 2 years asking the private partners to work with us jointly on technology investigation so we can maximize recycling and landfill diversion. After 2 years, the MRC basically went it alone because the partners did not cooperate with the effort. So Greg and I went to a conference, we spoke, we recruited vendors, we put out a request for expressions of interest, we did a national search for technologies that would maximize recycling. We got 15 responses in August. We visited 4 facilities and put premium on facilities in that RFI that weren't just good ideas, but actually had hardware. They built something that could demonstrate the technology. We didn't want people coming in with their great ideas because that can take a long time. We want people with facilities that we could touch and walk through and see what they were doing so we would understand the impacts, the products, the costs, what it would take to do that, and they would be ready to meet our challenges in our time frame. And I think we went to facilities in Toronto, Virginia, Alabama, 2 in Ohio. We've talked to a number of other vendors. We've done a pretty good search. At this point, I think in the January meeting, and I don't know if you were here, the board talked extensively about that and directed staff to take the next step of effort with one of the vendors who's actually here and who will be presenting as item 12 on the agenda. And we fully intend, we hope you stay around and see what we've been trying to do on this, because this is, certainly the sentiment that this is a issue that needs to get solved, and to the extent we can solve it to the greatest extent, consistent with waste reduction, with waste recycling, making products that are organic, that are the highest possible value, and using technologies that are compatible with what we are doing elsewhere in the state of Maine in terms of our pulp and paper industry and other industries that naturally resonate here, for which there's local resident expertise at the University of Maine and local companies. This is what we're trying to do, and I guess I'm skipping ahead to the introduction. I would have given later, but you asked the question, so I thought I could help answer it.
I think the easier you make it for the customer, and it just all goes in one bag, the higher. Some of the small towns that have to transport cannot meet the recycling phase of even getting to 50% because it's a lot of work. And you know, I tried to do zero sort, and I think the one bag zero sort for everything is, you know, I know that's probably trademarked, but, you know, one bag does it all. And even the bag gets recycled. I just see that there's opportunity. I mean, you know, cow manure wasn't valuable except to spread on fields, but now they're utilizing it for energy in a facility that was just built. And I mean, people have to have ideas up there to use this product. So,
And one of the other questions that I kind of heard in Matt's list of questions was around why doesn't MRC just buy Burke and make it work? And you know what? We looked at that, and in our partnership agreement, we have a buyout clause. We tried to gather some information around that, and I don't know.
Well, we put together back the whole chronology of the effort since 2007 of the MRC offers to the department to buy out the interest. The bottom line is that we've never gotten a price proposal that we could react to despite numerous requests. And so that there are a lot of advantages to retrofitting the site, but borrowing participation of our partners, we have to look at other alternatives because we don't control the ability to do that without the consent.
Just to summarize more precisely, the buyout option, the partnership agreement is not mature until 2018. It cannot be exercised until 2018. So any effort to purchase the facility sooner than that would require an agreement between among the partners. We've basically been advised that they don't have an interest in selling their interest.
Yes, sir.
I'm Paul McDonald, selectman from China. What happens, I mean, there's got to be a cutoff date. I mentioned this before to you, that where we got to go forward, we can't go back. Once we commit ourselves, because as councils is one thing, and you got selectmen to have to go to the people, you know it takes a year and a half to process that. I got no problem going forward. But at what point are we going to do that? I mean, we can't, 4 more years. I mean, it takes a year or two to build a plant, it takes a year or two to, so you're talking almost 3 years right there. I mean, I hope we can do this. I wasn't in favor of this 2 years ago. I was definitely against it. But now I am coming more in line with the more information that I get from the meetings that we've had in Waterville here. I'm getting more comfortable with it. I think new technology is the only way to go, especially where the partners do not want to come together. It seems like I think they want to go out on their own. But what happens when 187 communities decide to go with the new technology? Where is it going to put them?
Again, I think these questions should find their way into the public record because I think the questions are good, and I think the ability of the board to dialogue with the public in this fashion is very helpful.
Absolutely.
On a time frame, probably a 9 month, it could take the question of the local consent process. Because for any plan to move forward, the consent of the legislative bodies, municipalities would be required. And that will take probably a minimum of 9 months. And the target now, in relation to construction schedule and everything else, is we're looking at January through September of 2016. Would be when we'd need to go through the town meeting.
Okay. And if it does go through, what are we looking at a time frame for
I should be asking this from the people that are gonna be coming up at the noon time, but what's the time frame of constructing one of those facilities?
We're looking to, oh, crack I saw 11 fingers. 1 year. I mean, the thought is that if we are in fall 2016 where we're positioned to go forward, that we can be online in spring of 2018. And I think the other experience we're working on here is in 1998 when we did the refinancing, we had to go back to every town and do an extension. Yep. And that was the experience. We had the big white book, I don't know if you remember it, at the December 1997 annual meeting, and then we made some final votes at the January 1998 board meeting with the MRC, and we worked out into the councils first, and then the town meeting, but we had to get out the warrants in December, et cetera, to throw the whole spring meeting season. By June, we actually closed that financing on June 24th after 6 months, because we had to think about 60% of the tonnage approved the extensions, and that was enough to allow financing to go forward. And then we had a grace period afterwards for those towns that had town meetings between June and September to further get into the benefits to pass, just because it takes that long and because different towns are different town meeting scheduling. So that's the experience we're looking to. We understand that we're building new rather than refinancing. It's going to take a little bit longer. We're trying to make allowances for that. Are we concerned about schedule? Absolutely. But I hope that gives you some idea of what they could do.
I would add to that George's comments is that in the resolution that a majority of our membership responded to, there was a January 1, 2017 date that we put in there that specifically because we realized that we have to have a decision and a direction as the MRC board as to what we're doing by that time in order to go through our public process. So yes, schedule is very, very tight. And in that resolution also was the fact that we'd be filing for a PBD, a public benefit determination. So that was huge for us to get those things into the, it was publicly done. And that, there's a date that we imposed on ourselves that we've got to have our work done so that we can move forward.
And that includes commitments from the member towns, right? To go along with what we decide. There's a perception that we 9 decide what we're going to do and everybody falls in place, but we have to have the communities buy in. Yeah. Despite our $200,000 a year salaries. Hold up the vote.
Following this a long time, I've testified before on the legislative subcommittees on this down in Augusta, and I've been to every meeting possible on this that I can make. I really am looking at this that MRC is trying to set the bar moving forward to not fill a big landfill, but to create something that actually serves the people in this state for the next 30 years by bringing new technology that reduces what we put into a landfill. But unfortunately, the landfills we have, Tom Saviello testified on that part that our landfills are almost full. We do not have capacity anyway. So what, is this where MRC is trying to go to set that bar, to be the hierarchy here in the state, that this is where 187 municipalities are committing to a contract for the next 30 years with MRC to build a facility that is not about polluting the earth, it's about trying to save our state.
Very good.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's the answer.
You saw the board members shaking their head up and down. That's exactly what we've been working on. And I'm going to take a stab at speaking for the board, but we look at the landfill as the tail end of this process that we're going through with all the MSW. And it's a resource. We do not want to fill it up, but we do need to have control of it. because that's the only way we're going to be able to serve our membership in a way that's affordable, environmentally friendly, long term. So that meets the goals of our mission. Yes, sir.
There was one more question that brought it up to me was in the hierarchy, the procedure that you're looking into, going to, would probably be category 1, whereas landfill is a category 3. Now, are you going to put the two together?
Category 5.
Or whatever. But are you going to put the two together, or are you going to kind of split them off? I know you need the landfill, but the 20% is going to be going to the landfill no matter what, whether it be slurry or whatever else it's going to be. But the hierarchy is 1 would be the fuel out of this particular plant you're going to have. If you go in it as 1, how are you going to rate with the state?
I think that's all been discussed at length in our public benefit application about potential facilities. Part of the difficulty now is that we don't have a technology and we don't have a facility, but yet we do know that there are going to be residuals coming out of whatever we choose, and we need to do something with it.
But I think too, the important thing is that I think our goal is to be able to maximize diversion so that the amount of residuals we're creating are minimized, because we're allowing communities, because they're not going to have guaranteed annual tonnages they need to meet, whatever they want to do to maximize their, minimize their production of solid waste to begin with, and then begin with the hierarchy through ways that we can pull out from the stream things that we can utilize, recycle, convert to fuels and other things, so that we're, even if there is 20% residuals, the amount of MSW that had gone in to begin with is smaller than we're producing now, because communities want to recycle. They want to minimize the amount of solid waste that they have.
And just, another thing, 2 or 3 years ago, lobster rope had to be removed to protect the whales. That lobster rope turned into floor mats that they're selling for $30 to $50 a piece. I hope DEP realizes that this is an opportunity to really raise the bar on saving our state, our water quality, and setting a new standard for trash, that it isn't about making money for greedy corporate partners, but for literally serving our communities. And I think that's where the 187 member municipalities are, that we want to see something that is different and that our people can be proud of, instead of just filling a hole in the ground like 30 years ago. And today.
Mr. Fletcher.
Yes, sir. How are you? I got a process question, and it's really a communication question. I think that you've got a very compelling case and a vision. And, I served 8 years in the legislature and had a couple more years in the executive branch. And my sense is that you're going to find a bipartisan agreement. You're not going to find folks who say we should fill up landfills and folks who we should say. So I don't think that's the issue. My question is how, I know the DEP process is pretty straightforward, and they're a regulatory entity, and they don't establish policy. How much information and communication have you had with other entities, such as the Energy Office, the solid waste groups, within state government? Because a way to ensure success is not only have the member communities, but to also have agencies within state government to be also in support. I think that when you talk with the legislators, if you've got a solid vision backed up with facts and technology, you're going to find overwhelming support. Here's what I'm afraid is going to happen. As 2018 gets closer, because the legislature had made a policy decision with purpose to have ratepayers subsidize the technology. And that's cost, I don't know what it's cost, 200 million, 300 million, depending on what you assume the profitability is. The policymakers are going to be asking this question: what went wrong? what happened to this $200 or $300 million of ratepayer money? And that's Bangor Hydro customers' ratepayer money. We in Winslow, under the CMP group, actually had Bangor Hydro customers subsidizing our low fee to landfill. Thank you very much, Bangor Hydro customers. But I think the legislature is going to say, what happened? Because the fundamental premise was that if we make the investment up front with the subsidy, that when we get to maturity, like paying off your mortgage, we're going to have an asset that's going to be serving the people of Maine in a sustainable and cost-effective manner. If we reach the conclusion that PERC is not competitive, or that technology is not competitive, somebody's going to be asking the question, what went wrong? So that when you have the next discussion about your next technology you want to use, somebody's going to say, what have you learned from the last one that you aren't going to do for this one? So that we aren't going to ask ratepayers or taxpayers or whoever to subsidize a technology that doesn't end up working in a sustainable manner. So that's my question. Thank you.
Can I in part address the legal premise? First of all, I've always wanted to meet Mr. Fletcher, in part because a fellow graduate from the University of Maine, Jim Robbins, speaks so highly of you. I think 2/3 of what I heard you say, sir, was just right on. There are legislators that are going to wonder what went wrong. But PERPA is federal law, and so state legislators really didn't determine the wisdom of a federal policy. That's not their job. I've listened to the discussion carefully in terms of solid waste management and the technology associated with it. And I haven't heard a new federal policy coming that will provide a subsidy for technology. So as far as I know, subsidy is out of the equation. And so I think what's happening in a way that's very appropriate to local government is the costs are coming home, and the local municipalities should be doing exactly what a collective of municipalities are doing. That's why I appreciated the first 2/3 of what you said, because you're in essence complimenting the fact that you've got a group of communities who are sharing resource to come up with a new solution. I'm not hearing that the federal government is going to bring us a new subsidy. I'm not sensing that the state of Maine has the dollars to provide new subsidy. And so I think those days are over, and now what we've got to do is develop our own solution. I think a collection of municipalities are, but I'd have to defer to George in terms of how we evaluate the wisdom of the past investment.
I'm looking at my watch right now, let the board proceed with minus 11, but when lunchtime comes, I want to share that.
That being said, I am going to move the agenda along a little bit. This was a great discussion to have. We do have 2 more items that we need to take care of before the break, and then after the break we'll have a presentation from the library. So I'm going to go along to item number 10, consideration of the amendment to MRC bylaws to incorporate post-2018 planning activities associated with implementing waste disposal offers following the expiration of waste disposal agreements with PERC. Greg.
Thank you, Chip. We've got a underlined straight through copy of the proposed amendments in the board there. Couple categories. One, primarily housekeeping. We had a number of past references to Bangor Hydro, and now the name is formally changed to a new name. We had a provision related to the stock owners. We understood some years ago that activity's expired. Then the next element was on page 2. We just inserted language that relates to the current times in terms of all the activity that we have undertaken in preparation for post-2018. And I'll double check with the legal counsel, make sure I haven't missed anything, but I think that's.
I have an amendment to that I would like to propose. As a matter of fact, we've got
copies, it's really very minor. But in number 10, it says, identify and implement alternatives. And I question whether we have the ability to implement the options. And so I would like to change it to identify alternative waste disposal options that may be implemented. I think we may have to form another organization and have it supported by vote of the legislative bodies of our municipalities to give us the authority to actually implement these ideas that we're working on.
Can I ask a question? I don't want to be impertinent or take too long, but I just want to ask a question to Member Keating. If we assume that because of the structure of the MRC, the board takes things back to the community as part of the consent process, doesn't the consent process address your question?
Are we putting the cart before the horse, though?
I don't think so.
Well, I think let me just jump in for a second. Remember, the context of this is the bylaws, that these are the powers of the organization. It's not speaking to what the board can do or what the membership must do. It's a statement of the general purposes of the entity. So when it says that the entity has the corporate power to implement waste disposal options, that doesn't suggest that the board can do it without the membership. It says that is within the corporate purposes that's subject to appropriate approvals, and I think it's a given that any fundamental project of the type we're talking about is ultimately going to require the approval of the membership. We want a statement in here that this is a purpose of the organization. Among the purposes of the organization are to identify and implement alternative waste options. One of the reasons we've done this is it's been suggested in some of the submissions to the DEP that the MRC's mission is just to manage the PERC contract. And I think that I've been with this board long enough to know that the mission is much broader than that. The mission is stated in the preceding section is much broader than that. We have, as you may recall, those who've been on the board from time to time, we have amended the bylaws to sort of bring them up to date with the current activity that advances that central mission. I view this as consistent with that process. But I do think it's important to say that the entity, the MRC, as an entity, it's a given that it would require membership consent, has among its purposes to investigate and implement other waste disposal options. In other words, purposes of this corporation are not limited to dealing with the program.
You said better than what I said.
The language as it's written it sort of implies that it's a foregone conclusion that we're implementing an alternative waste disposal option. Is there a reason why MRA's suggested language would not meet the needs of the charter change?
Yes.
The bylaw change? It is.
What if there's a clarification, implement following consent of the legislative bodies, the municipalities or something? I mean, that's
where it would come from.
Something like that.
I scribbled down something, if I can just allow me to read it. Identify, and then strike out identify alternative waste disposal options that may be implemented by the MRC or a successor organization following the termination of the member's waste disposal agreement between PERC and so on and so forth.
I like that.
So it implies that the MRC may be the implementer of this project post-2018.
Let's try to corral things in. Andy first.
Just appreciate that just as you had the prior discussion regarding solid waste disposal capacity options and how you're going to move forward, you're at a crossroads. I'd say in the context of this regulatory proceeding, you're at a crossroads. If you're going to bring your members along, this is the moment to bring them on. If you, I actually like the fact the question's been raised, and I don't mind Josh's suggestion either, but this is a step-up moment for the organization to say, incrementally, we're confirming what we understand the broader mission of the organization, irrespective of the procedure, which is a different question, but I would agree with Dan. I don't think that goes in the bylaws, and I don't want to clutter up the bylaws with the confusing element for purposes of a broader procedure. So I have purpose in being a little bit persistent. If you want me to detail that, I'm happy to, but I'll hold it because you're time schedule.
I think I appreciate Candy's comments. You're trying to frankly dispel any notion that some parties may be seeking for their own purposes to project that this board is somehow acting beyond the scope of the organization's mission. And part of that mission, obviously, is we are pointing out beginning a process leading to implementation of that. I, like Andy, I don't think I had any objection to Josh's proposed language. I think it addresses Ellery's concern. So I would not stay out of the way of an amendment along the lines of Josh.
Okay, Josh, would you read your proposed change again for the board's sake?
Identify alternative waste disposal options that may be implemented by the MRC or a successor organization following termination of the members' waste disposal agreements with PERC, including, and then he continues.
I'll second his motion.
We've got a motion and a second for proposed amendment, proposed change to the bylaws amendment.
Mr. Chairman, just for clarification purposes, I interpret the motion to include all of the other proposed amendments.
So,
the housekeeping.
Oh, absolutely. I apologize. All the other housekeeping.
Okay, is the board clear on what being asked, Phil?
I thought I was. So that's favorite. Are we just voting simply to amend this portion, after which we will have to vote to adopt the document as amended? Or are we moving to approve the document, period?
So I guess
new language.
my understanding is that we've got a language change in this particular, paragraph 10, that is a language change, but then we're also, as amended, but also the rest of the proposed changes that are.
Well, I think it would be clear on the record.
Let's take two
Let's amend.
We take a vote to amend the draft,
Right.
after which we take a motion
Okay.
to approve the document as amended.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to amend the draft. All those in favor? Opposed? It's a vote. Okay. All those.
I'll make a motion to adopt all the changes as amended.
Second.
Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Let's vote. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for the clarification. Item number 11, consideration of 2014 budget amendment to fund post-2018 planning activities. This is what we spoke about earlier in the meeting.
Yes, we spoke about at Finance Committee. We adopted a budget for the MRC of $816,675 back in, actually less 42,000, back in January through our regular budget process. We then amended and added $42,000 to the budget, which was funded through an additional payment out of the, or transfer from the operating budget stabilization fund. There we go. Talking with Greg, our activities for post-2018 and also for our current litigation with our partners is driving our budget. Once again, he and I sat down and went through current where we are to budget. We went out and got scopes of work from consultants that are assisting us. and we've come up with a proposed adjustment of $196,000. And we would propose that comes from, once again, the operating budget stabilization fund, which has I packed up my stuff, has a balance of 1.7 million right now. I don't know how much the Finance Committee is recommending that we move forward with this budget adjustment. I don't know if you want to talk to Greg about the specifics in it. You all got a line-by-line budget line, the proposal by budget line in your background. The one thing that we would want to add onto this would be a approval to take that money out of the budget stabilization fund. Correct, George?
Yeah.
So, any questions?
One of the things that we did discuss during the Finance Committee meeting was the amount of money that we have in that fund currently. We know that there are going to be additional expenses in the coming year or slightly more in advance of the time that we get to a point where we're ready to do a formal proposal to all of the members and then ask for their formal ratification of the plan moving forward. We do have enough money. Some of those costs, the details of which are we can't give exactitudes at this moment in time, but we do have an idea, and we're just going to continue to push that process forward during the course of the next year. So,
any other questions of the board?
I'll make a motion to accept the budget amendments as proposed.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Vote.
I'll make a second motion that we can vote to fund it. Make a second motion to fund that with a transfer from the budget operating stabilization, operating budget stabilization. Very good.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded to take the money out of the operating stabilization fund. Bunch of words out, sorry. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. That should do it for item number 11. We are going to take a short break for some lunch. We'll start up, hopefully, let's look to start up the presentation by Fiber Aid at 12:30. We'll take a quick